Good afternoon, all, and welcome for me, and thank you very much for joining today. As mentioned, we're here to run through some of the details and updates across some of the work areas that are being coordinated and the networks are delivering through the Strategic Connections Group, which the ENA convene, as well as today. Connections remains a very significant top priority for networks and, of course, for the whole sector. We hear a lot, increasingly so, about the importance of improving connections outcomes to support, government objectives and policies such as Clean Power 30 and importantly, economic growth for the whole country. And these are really important. They lend a lot of focus to this. But of course, networks also remain focused on connections to make sure we're continuing to deliver better support and better connections outcomes for customers and customer projects. So remain very much focused on that in this context. The Strategic Connections Group, as mentioned, is kind of the group that kind of on behalf that we're convening today, that we're presenting on. It's composed of all of the Britain's electricity network operators, convened by us, the ENA, and we're working quite closely with DESNZ and DfT and other aspects of government, as well as Ofgem and the NESO, to ensure that we're all working collaboratively to introduce consistent industry reforms that really do get to that outcome of accelerated customer connections across the sector. Before we jump in today, the SCG, I guess, is reflecting on the work that's gone to date. Was established at the end of 2022 for exactly this purpose, been consistent on that throughout. And I think it's useful to reflect on some of the activities that have gone through and reforms that have been implemented and progress in that time, and ongoing activities, as well as all of the major reforms that we remain focused on and are still in flight. The first thing to do is, and many of you may know this or have seen it on our website or from previous webinars, but first thing to say is that connections, in terms of actually delivering and energizing customer connections, remained in progress throughout this period, particularly for at distribution level. And some of the stats on our network demonstrate that, for example, the last regulatory year, more customer connections were energized than ever before. It was just under 10 gigawatts of customer projects that were energized in the 23-24 regulatory year, and that delivery continues. Some of the reforms that we have introduced that support outcomes for customers are really still quite significant and worth reflecting on. So technical limits, as an example of connecting distribution customers on a non-firm basis ahead of transmission works being needed upstream, accelerated over 11 gigawatts of customer projects by an average of 6 years. And we're really pleased to have been able to push those kinds of reforms through across the country. We delivered reforms to our engineering assessments and the way capacity utilization is managed, particularly for storage, that made better use and released 33 gigawatts of capacity from the existing network infrastructure. And queue management was introduced and consistently focused onto particularly distribution, but then later as well transmission, and that has actually removed just under 12 gigawatts of projects from the queue in the months and years before the TMO4 Plus window opened at the moment. So there really is a lot of work that the industry has delivered, and we're really pleased to kind of say that supported customers in years to date. But that's all kind of looking back, and it's useful to reflect on. But today we're going to get into some updates on some of the areas where the SCG is currently focused on. I'm looking at the agenda slide still, so if we can move on one slide just to help, that'd be great. On the overview today, what we're going to do is give you an update on some of the details of the latest updates to queue management, and particularly what that means for customers and their projects today and going through the TMO4 Plus process. We'll also give an update on some of the work that's ongoing around demand customer connections, which are also important and increasingly becoming a focus. So we'll give you those updates, and then we'll have an opportunity for Q&A, as you saw on the agenda. The final thing I'll really say before we get into the meat of it is, we're not going to try and present and give you updates and details on TMO4 Plus, or lots of the work that's being coordinated with all networks in the NESO on implementing that, or some of the wider activities and conversations that are happening across government and Ofgem. Lots of activity in the space. but we'll try and focus on these topics to get you a really good opportunity to get into the detail and ask questions. So that will be the focus for the day, and a few kind of reflections and kind of scene setting before we kick off. So nothing more from me. I'll hand over now to Stefan Jones to get us into the first topic on queue management.
Thank you, David, and thank you everyone for taking the time to join us for this. So we're looking at the queue management work that was done probably about 6 months ago now, but the main reason for including it today is that obviously the guidance document went live in September. So I wanted to start off just by throwing up a slide that was actually used back in our engagement with everyone when we were looking at this back in, as I say, sort of May, June time this year. So queue management was originally introduced back in 2018 and was updated in 2021. And it's the process used by industry to ensure that all our connections are moving towards their planned connection dates. With the Connections Action Plan, the Ofgem DESNZ led plan, and then subsequently NESO's led Connections Reform process, we needed to basically dust off the guidance and make sure that it was aligned for those processes. Under the cap, we were actually required to do that. So the key focus areas back in May, June were to make sure that we weren't creating something that was not aligned with the new TEA process, but also to make sure that in looking at it, and we'll look at the journeys that are there in a little bit, make sure it wasn't remained aligned for all appropriate DNO connections, because at the end of the day, TMO4 Plus is only looking at a small subset, if you like, of all the connections work DNOs do. There was part of the cap requirement was to look where appropriate to align with transmission processes, and for us as network operators, we wanted where appropriate to look at providing additional or further clarity and or improvement to the current processes. We go on to the next slide. This now just shows us why, as I say, we were looking to put an update onto today's agenda. So after all the work that we did through the early summer, the revised guidance document was published in September of this year, and in doing so became applicable to 3 subsets of projects, if you like. So all new demand and generation applications from the 1st of October 2025. So any application that was received from the 1st of October was subject, where relevant, to the revised queue management or milestone management process. It was also scoped to be relevant to all projects that came through the Gate 2 to Hull queue process and secured a Gate 2 offer, and that will happen when the Gate 2 offer is issued and then accepted. And then we had a small subset of relevant schemes that were TMO4 Plus applicable, but were not part of the Gate 2 to Hull queue process. So that is basically the projects where they received their DNO offer during the transition process or after the pause. And as such, they also need to be aligned with the TMO for appropriate milestones. So if you go on to the next slide for me, please, Natasha. Thank you. Going through what we went through previously, but what was changed or what was updated, if you like, in the milestone guidance. So first one, the DNO sought to provide that clarity on schemes that were eligible. So all, and not just clarity, but I suppose consistency of implementation was also a key factor here, especially in demand. So previously we'd had all generation schemes at 1 megawatt and above were subject to milestone management, and that remains the case today and is not impacted by the introduction of CMP 446 or the change in the thresholds. This doesn't mean that you are TEA or not TEA. This means you're 1 megawatt or above. And all DNOs have moved forward on demand schemes at 5 MVA and above will all be excuse me, subject to or managed with construction management milestones. There is one obvious extra bit in there that DNOs could include schemes below those thresholds where it is appropriate either for the region or for the network state, but that would be made clear at the time of offer. But for consistency, all schemes across the country, 5 megawatts, 1 megawatt and above for generation, 5 MVA and above for demand. As I mentioned briefly before, one of the key objectives was to make sure that the new guidance was aligned or applicable for the revised TMO4 Plus process for what we now call TEA, but also that it didn't or it remained valid for non-generation TEA schemes. So we've created the 3 principal journeys, effectively those schemes that do not require NESO transmission entry assessment. So that could be generation between 1 and 5 now with 446, depending on the GSP constraint, and it could be a lot of demand. Then you have the schemes that require NESO transmission entry assessment and are following the gated process. So that's what we all know under TMO4 Plus and gate 2 to the whole queue for relevant generation. And also we wanted to make sure that we were covering schemes requiring NESO transmission entry assessment following a non-gated process, which is effectively your large-scale demand, which is obviously becoming more and more prevalent in today's changing market. And then the last 3 bullets on this slide show the key updates or changes that we introduced. So the biggest one was probably for missed milestone management. We moved from the old tolerance process to a remedy process, both to provide some closer alignment with transmission, but also to remove the complexity of the previous process. M4 milestone was reviewed to ensure that it aligned with the new TMO4 Plus TEA process, as it had previously been based around the previous statement of works and Appendix G process. And finally, milestone M7, the evidence criteria was refined and clarified because that had been a little bit lacking in clarity in the previous guidance. So they're the key changes that we introduced. If we go on to the next slide, thank you, Natasha. And sorry, the next one after that as well. So I'm not going to go into these in any detail. They are as we presented at the seminar in London. But as I say, we created the 3 milestone journeys. They all have a similar look because obviously the milestones are applicable, but there are slight differences. So this is the journey where there is no NESO consent required, and as such, M4 is not an applicable element to that process, and that's why that's transparent, grayed out if you like there, and schemes would go straight into M1 and M3 as they currently or previously did. The next slide will show us the gated or TMO4 Plus process. This is for your relevant generation, and we can see here that in most cases, because of readiness, M3 will be secured at the point where you're going into the TEA, and coming out of the TEA is the first milestone M4, which would then lead you on successful completion into M1 and on. And again, the rest of the structure is the same as in the previous version, but also the same as in the non-TEA process that we've just looked at. This is one we can come back to later at the end of the session, probably if there's more questions on this area. And then the final one, slide please, is the non-gated, or effectively the mod app, which will be used for relevant demand. And here, because there is no readiness criteria in that process, we have M4, which is the same, but M3 will still be required. So we've just clarified that as you come out in the same way as it is for the non-TEA, you would have M1 and M3 working at the same time. And as a final element for presentation today, we just used the slide that had been pulled together for the seminar, which showed how that M4, which is obviously the one that's been changed to align with TM04 Plus, to align with the process that will be in place when new schemes are going through. The M4 milestone effectively provides 24 months to get through the TEA process with NESO from the point of a DNO acceptance, a DNO offer, sorry, acceptance. And just to give a guideline here, if that were to be on the 1st of the 1st 26, and if we were to see the first window close in that early quarter, the first quarter of 2026, which is probably a little bit earlier than it may be now. These are sort of just indicative diagrammatic dates. You would be able to go all the way through that first window, the second window, and even the third window in 2027 would facilitate a response within the 24-month guideline. The fourth window, if it was to fall at that beginning of the fourth quarter, end of the third quarter of 2027, would not provide enough time then for the outcome to be in time. But it shows that there are plenty of opportunities to get the scheme into a window ahead of the milestone date. So that's what I've brought on here today. I think one of the other little bits I wanted to bring up was just that obviously where we talk about gate 2 to the whole queue, and where we talk about those schemes that have got the more current longer dates that are requesting or seeking acceleration, these milestones will not be applied until those gate 2 offers are out and accepted. So that was one of the points that I think has been coming up a lot recently. So that's the end of the update on management milestones, construction management milestones, queue management milestones, and I will now be handing over to Laura Henry.
Thanks, Stefan. Hi, everyone. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm Laura Henry, Head of Connections Policy for NGED, and I also chair the TM04 Plus group for the ENA. I know we've previously presented on gate 1 and how that will apply for distribution, but a lot of work has been going on over the last few months in relation to what would happen if a distribution customer received a gate 1 and they want to then convert it into a gate 2 or back into a gate 2. So that is the update that we're going to give today. I just want to talk it through in detail in terms of how that process would work. Just before I go into that, I thought it's probably worth just recapping what a gate 1 is. So a gate 1 removes queue position and capacity at both distribution and transmission. It provides an indicative point of connection, indicative works and costs, and removes securities. The DNOs have been working together to make sure that as a gate 1 is a new product that's coming out of the connections reform process, we wanted to be as aligned as possible with that. So we've been working on a letter that will be as consistent as possible across all of the DNOs. There may be very slight differences in terms of how DNOs want to present it in terms of style and wording, etc. But the main bulk of the Gate 1 letters will be the same across all DNOs. If we go on to the next slide, please, then I'll talk through the changes that we, kind of the new process that we wanted to introduce today. So as of Monday, this guidance that we've been working on together, so joint guidance, has been published. So please have a look on the ENA website where you can find this guidance, and it will talk you through the various options. What we wanted to do, like I said in the instruction, is to find a process that would work so that customers that want to convert their Gate 1 back into a Gate 2 had options on how they can do that and the options that work best for their project. So collectively, as a group of DNOs, we came up with these two options, which I'm just going to talk you through now. So the first option is option A. And option A is where a project requests a full offer to be provided from the DNO before then going back through a gated process. So by requesting this full offer, it isn't declaring readiness, it's requesting a full offer so that the project can see exactly what the point of connection will be, the distribution works, costs, etc., and date before they then go back through the gated process. It would then be up to that project to decide which gated which window they would want to go through, bearing in mind that NESO has an obligation to open a window at least once a year, but it is anticipated that they will do it more than once a year. Option B is then where a project would want to go through the readiness process, so the gated window, before then obtaining the full DNO offer. So this means that they would be going through on the information that the DNO already holds for the Gate 1, and then only if they then achieve the Gate 2 readiness criteria and pass strategic alignment, only at that point would then a full offer be provided by the DNO. We've tried to make it clear on the process on the diagram below, but what I will do in a second is just go through one of the process flows from the guidance document, just to talk you through that, just so it's clear where fees apply. But just before I go on to that, it's probably worth just saying as well, if a project wants to change considerably and therefore doesn't fit anymore with the ENA allowable changes guidance, then that project would have to submit a brand new application, and at that point the Gate 1 offer would terminate. So just a reminder that if any Gate 1 projects are changing considerably, this process wouldn't apply. You wouldn't be able to pick one of these options and you would have to submit a brand new application. If we can just go on to the next slide, thank you. So this, hopefully you can see this okay, but this is a process flow that is in the guidance, like I say. So please have a look on the ENA website at the guidance, because it talks through both of the options in a lot more detail, and it also shows this process flow as well. But essentially what this process flow is trying to show is the time frame differences, as I've just mentioned, with the two options. So like I say, option A is very much the project would get all of the information up front before then choosing to go through a gated window. Option B is that the project would wait to see if it meets the Gate 2 criteria and strategic alignment before then going through that full studying again with the DNO. Just a couple of things to highlight on this process flow. So both options would require a study fee. So option A, the study fee would be at the beginning of the process, once the project has asked to vary and to be re-studied again. That's when the study fee would be required there. If option B is selected, then it would only be at the point that the project has passed strategic alignment and the Gate 2 criteria that the study fee would then be required, because if the project doesn't pass the Gate 2 criteria or strategic alignment, then a Gate 1 would be, well, it would remain at Gate 1 as per its current position. And then for both options, the gated application fee would apply as well at the same point. for both of those options at the point that the project goes back through the gated process. So hopefully it's quite a quick update from me, but hopefully that covers everything that you need to know if you do receive a gate 1 and you want to go back through. But happy to take questions afterwards as well. And I am handing over to Neil. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Neil Madgwick, head of part of the connections business in UK Power Networks, but also chair the demand working group, a new group that we'll go through the purpose of in 2 seconds. So next slide, please, Natasha. So a little bit of background, and I'm sure a number of you will have seen, if not read, the whole thing, the UK's modern industrial strategy, with a link in the slide for you there to look at a later date, and then an update recently from Ofgem on connections, which again we put a link in the chat. But in short, in the industrial strategy, government highlighted a number of industries that they wanted to support with inward investment into the UK, looking to increase employment growth, GDP, etc. And in that strategy, they recognised that electricity, both the cost of electricity and grid connections, are essential to enable those industries to flourish. So from a perspective of the grid, putting aside the cost to one side for a second, they were looking to work collaboratively with the network operators to enable support to connect those strategic projects to the grid, and in addition, where appropriate and possible, to see whether they could accelerate any of those connections for those strategically important projects. At the same time as the strategy was pushing these industries, it was recognised that we as network operators were seeing a large number, an increasingly large volume of demand applications, and you can see in the table there, between November 24 and June 25, 85 gigawatts additional demand capacity coming into the network operators. So on one hand, we're seeing an increase in the number of projects wanting to connect, and at the same time, we're wanting government wanting to make sure that those strategically important projects can connect to the grid as swiftly and efficiently as possible. So what did we do as network operators? Onto the next slide, please, Natasha. So thank you. So we stood up a demand working group under the Strategic Connections Group to see how we could support government with those ambitions. We came up with a long list of areas where we thought we could support, but initially there were 4 subgroups that we set up, which are meeting weekly currently, and actually the cadence is increasing as government's appetite in this area increases as well. So the first of those was to support government's desire to accelerate and support those designated strategic projects through the Connections Journey, branded the Connections Accelerator Service within the industrial strategy. So we've worked closely with DESNZ. We've developed a process to enable us to look at those strategic projects, and we're beginning to trial that at the end of this month, ready for the launch of that service next year through DESNZ. Another area that we thought it was a good time to look at was the demand entry requirements. So it's important for us and for all of our customers to ensure that we're getting the right genuine projects coming into network operators, so that we can ensure that those projects that are ready and able to connect are able to do so, and that we do discourage speculative inquiries. So the first thing we're looking at in this space is to looking to see what we've done in generation and understanding whether there is some crossover from the requirements and generation that we should bring into demand. And then on top of that, looking whether there are any specific demand entry requirements that we should be implementing. So that group's come up with a recommendation, and it's just currently doing an impact assessment of that recommendation before we look to share that with our wider customers and stakeholders. The third area was thinking about whether we should have a demarcation of what comes into transmission and what comes into distribution. At the moment, we get occasions when we see a project coming that's applied to both that demand and transmission for the same project at the same time, which is clearly inefficient and doesn't help us when we're looking at the queue of projects that we have in demand space. So what we're looking to see at the moment is whether we can develop and whether it makes sense to develop some clear engineering guidance as to what should connect where on which network. And then finally, to enable government to deliver a number of its ambitions that it set out in the industrial strategy and in Ofgem's letter, it will require probably some form of regulatory change, and clearly the network operators have a part to play in supporting the implementation of any of that regulatory change, which might then enable these faster connections and the prioritization of those strategic demand connections. Final slide, please. Thanks, Natasha. So what are we actually working to support government to do, and by when? So the ambition is to look at a number of these areas by the time the next window opens, currently Q2 in 2026. So that includes the launch of this Connections Accelerator service to support government's designated strategic demand projects. And that would include then looking at what tools can we put in place to prioritize that strategic demand of transmission. There's some work going on to understand how we can align data center connections specifically at transmission with a strategic plan. We'll be looking to implement any queue entry and membership requirements of both transmission and distribution that we think are right and that we've agreed are appropriate. And then a piece of work also going on to look at high voltage connections, signposted, as to say, in the Ofgem open letter, which you've got the link to, looking at the high voltage connections, which is, in this case, means those over 132 kV in England and Wales. So those areas we're looking to deliver by the middle of next year. Thank you.
I think you'll be handing to David, Neil. David, over to you for the next slide, please.
Thanks, Evie, and thanks all. You won't have too much from me before we get into Q&A, and I can see questions coming in the chat, so we'll make sure we try and keep some time for that. But just a few quick reflections looking forward, if reflections looking forward makes any sense at all, to finish off the presentations. Looking ahead, what we definitely can say is that there's lots of activity ongoing, and very few of those will kind of finish and conclude and just go away. So networks will continue their focus on working collaboratively to support the implementation of TMO4+. I know that will be the conclusion of the gate 2 to whole queue process, and then moving into the 434 kind of more enduring process. The demand activities that you've heard about today, will continue into 2026, and as the demand picture evolves, we'll continue to monitor that and look to identify if any other reforms or solutions or activities are beneficial to help with support demand connection customers as well. One thing we didn't talk too much today about, but is still a focus, and I'm sure will continue to be in the new year, will be making sure that we continue to publish as consistent and potentially extended and improved data to the market to support connections applications and the market's kind of decisions and visibility therein. So those are a few activities that we're looking ahead to in the new year. one of the other things, though, is that we'll also be doing, I mentioned some of the solutions that have been developed through the networks and the SCG to date. We will continue to review those as the industry progresses and the framework around connections progresses. For example, continuing to check in on the guidance around queue management and the enduring solutions for tech limits, for example. And throughout that process, just want to emphasize that we'll continue to engage with you through webinars such as this and other events, but also other publications and newsletters, consultations where appropriate. So we'll make sure that engagement continues to be a core part of that. So that's all from me. Just as a quick look ahead, and I'll hand back to Avi, and we will be moving into the Q&A portion of the session.
Thanks, David. I'll now bring back all the panelists on camera so we are able to go through these questions in sequence. But equally, if there are any points that you think the other members or the who introduced in the past or at the start of the session want to pipe in, please do come along and participate in the conversation. I intend to start from, I think, in the reverse chronological order, right, starting at the beginning. So I expect most of the questions initially will be your way, Stefan. So we can walk through that. I will skip through some of the ones that we have. Some of the colleagues have already responded, just in the interest of time. But however, if you think that isn't clear, and if you need further conversation on that, feel free to add a few more comments or upvote those questions. We can probably come back to them. I will first of all kick off with, I think, Siam Hassan Khan's first question here oh, hang on. Yes, that's the first one. I do take kind of the feedback on the ENA website on board. So thanks. It's not a specific question, but we do understand that we need to sort of tidy up a little bit. So work is ongoing on that, and hopefully you'll see outcomes of that in the near future. But coming back to the more technical questions, over to you, Stefan. On the first instance, we have questions. Will the timelines be negotiable once gate 2 offer comes in under from the gate 2 to whole queue process? Noting that there are factors affecting them are beyond the hands of the IPPs.
So fundamentally, the M1 and M2 milestones are as defined in the document guidance, and for M1 especially, there is no change from the previous guidance. We went through this in the seminar in the summer. There is a process where if there is pre-planning requirements, then you get an extension to that milestone. So the standard milestone for M1 is 2 months from the completion of the TEA process, but pre-planning requirements can immediately get a 12-month period. And actually, if there's pre-planning that requires longer than that, the DNO can provide that extension. And then from the completion of M1, the M2, which is securing your planning, is a fixed 12 months. And there's nothing written into that for any extension, because apart from the standard appeals process for failure that was existing in the previous one. So I hope that answers the question.
The next one I have is from an anonymous user. Can you confirm that a generation customer who's placed in gate 1 as a part of gate 2 to whole queue process will have 2 years to meet milestone 4? And there are a couple of follow-on questions from there as well.
There's an interesting challenge here. So if you get gate 1 out of this process, you are not under milestones, because that is a fundamental part of the gate 1 descriptor from a transmission perspective. If you are protected, we have a period where we need to think how long somebody can stay at gate 1 under protections. If you're not protected gate 1, you've come through a strategic alignment gate 1, then you're effectively not under milestone management. So M4 currently doesn't apply to gate 1 projects.
Can I just add to that as well? Sorry, Stefan. If somebody chose option A in terms of the slides that I presented on gate 1 and asked for a full offer from the DNO, then M4 would then be included in that full offer. In terms that they would have to then meet, they would have to be in assigned gate 2 position within 24 months.
Thanks for the add-on, Laura. Quickly moving on then, for queue management milestones, if gate 2 windows are missed by NISO, will exceptions be allowed for these timescales? A question from Rachel Hodges.
I think I put an answer on that one, but basically the CUSC requires a minimum of one CMP 434 window in any 12-month period. If that was not achieved, then that would be a so if there was more than 12 months between two windows closing, then that I believe would be a justifiable request to a DNO for an extension of a milestone because you've missed an opportunity. There wouldn't be that for not having 2 or 3 windows in a year, because it would be the CUSC minimum requirement of 12 months. But if that was missed, I believe that would be a justifiable request to extend.
Thanks, Stefan. We have a few more that we've already responded to offline. Quickly moving on to the ones we've not responded to. We have another one from anonymous user. Noted that DNOs are working on a common Gate 1 offer letter. Is this work being shared with IDNOs?
So in terms of IDNOs that are a member of the ENA, if they want to be a part of that shared letter, then they're very welcome to kind of use the same template that we've all been working on.
Thanks, Laura. Next, I have a question from Catherine. For projects which hold a DNO accepted offer but have not yet been included in a project progression, can you confirm whether these M4 24 months start from when they accepted their offer?
Yeah, so the simple answer is no. It doesn't go from when you're accepted because you've been in this pause. It was actually put into the document, but I will need to take that away because I haven't got the exact detail. But fundamentally, it will start when the Gate 2 process, the Gate 2 to all queue process is coming to an output. I can't remember the detail. We'll come back to you, Catherine, on that one. But no, it doesn't start when you accepted in 2025 and have, been subject to the pause.
Thank you. So the follow-on, are we at risk of projects with accepted 2025 timeout M4 NISO do not open Gate 2 window until later in 2026? So I assume that's embedded within the answer as well.
We will, like I say, I'll have to come back to Catherine on that, but it will not be detrimental to a scheme that accepted at the very beginning of the pause, because that's an understandable issue. The first window is something like 16 months after that pause was introduced, potentially.
Thanks, Stefan. Next question I have from Morgan. If Gate 1 G1 battery has import and export, would removing the import element be considered as an allowable change?
I might have to defer that to one of my colleagues that knows the allowable changes guidance better than I do. I don't know if one of the other panel members wants to comment on that.
In Gate 2 to the whole queue, Laura, we absolutely fundamentally allowed that change, but that was specific to Gate 2 to the whole queue. For future 434, I think it would revert to this current guidance, which is actually under review at the moment, but to ensure clarity. But that basically would say if it has no technical impact on the network and the queue behind it, unless one of my colleagues wants to further clarify, but I think that would be looked at on a technical allowance or a technical impact basis.
Thanks, Stefan. I think one of the other questions that we haven't got to yet was actually about the allowable changes guidance and if it's being reviewed. Avi, Dan, I don't know if you want to come in on that point, as it's kind of linked to this question, I guess.
Yeah, I can come in, Laura. The questions around whether the allowable changes that you mentioned in your slides is using the current 2018 version, which it is, until that document is fully reviewed. Now we have Action, the Connections COG, which is an ENA group that specifically look at some of the connections guidance documentation and the kind of commercial elements of charging, etc. And we'll be looking for them to carry out a full review of the allowable changes guidance.
Thanks, Dan. I have next on my list. Thanks, Matthias, for sharing the link. We will be sharing all the links in the slide as well, embedded within that. So thanks for that. I have a next question from Grant. Based on slides gate 1 A and B options, is the proposal a customer would go in the gated process with NISO, and once confirmed, the DNO would then study the DNO networks and the DNO point of connection and design would change?
Yeah, so I guess option A is that the point of connection would be studied before the project goes through the gated window. Option B is that it would be studied afterwards. I mean, all of our offers are subject to change, subject to what comes back from NISO anyway. So in that respect, it would be no different to BAU. But I guess the difference in the two options is whether the customer wants to know the information before they're going through the window or after.
Thanks, Laura. So in the follow-up, if so, could be an issue with customers receiving offers they don't want, which seems flawed. So is that something we observed in the conversation, Laura?
So yeah, I guess it goes back to the point that I've just made about the reason why we made it customer choice was so the customer can decide when in their project lifecycle they would want to know the full details and whether they would want to know that before or after going through the gated process. As I said, it's always subject to change depending on what comes back from NISO.
Thanks, Laura. Next question I have is from Chin Ling. For the CMP 434 window, can we apply for a new connection for both the DNOs and gate 2 at the same time? Or do we still need to apply for the distribution offer first, accept it, and only then proceed to gate 2 application?
So I've answered this one. Sorry, Laura, I've answered this one in the thing already. Sorry to speak over you, Laura.
Oh, right, sorry.
The small and medium embedded, you have to have a DNO accepted a contracted offer before you declare readiness. So you can't do them simultaneously. So you have to go through that process of securing your D offer, accepting your D offer. That will trigger your M4 milestone, and you can, if you're ready and you're ready to declare readiness, you can declare readiness as soon as you've accepted, and it will go into the next window, or you have that period of time to go and secure your readiness status, if you like, for your project.
Yeah,
it's
thanks,
probably
Archibald.
just worth saying, sorry, Evie, and I just note that question says about transmission. I guess it's slightly different at transmission because they haven't got this this extra agreement as such, because we have the DNO agreement that needs to be in place first. So that's why at transmission you can just go straight into a window as a new application and provide evidence, whereas at distribution there's the distribution offer that needs to be taken into consideration first.
Thanks, Stefan. And sorry, I missed that you responded, Stefan. Sorry, I'll be more efficient. The next one I have, Graham, is please clarify study fee versus connection offer expense and indicate magnitude.
So in terms of the study fee, so this is the fee that will be required for the DNO to undertake the study work in order to then convert that gate 1 back into a full distribution offer. The study fee will be in accordance with each individual DNO's charging methodology. So conscious that we all have our own charging methodologies, and that fee will be in line with those.
Thank you. Next question I have from Jing Xiao. What do we need to submit to request a full DNO offer for gate 1 projects? Would it be similar to a brand new application, or simply a request to pay the fee?
So it'd be a request to vary the agreement, very similar to, well, it would be the same process as what the DNOs have now, where a variation is required. And then the study fee would be applicable as well if it's option 1 that you're going for, which it sounds like it. So yeah, it's very similar to the current variation process, which each DNO has their own process.
Thanks, Laura. So regarding the demand increase, NISO, ENA, and DNOs were warned this would happen during the CMP design, and when discussing making demand outside scope of both and the pause, data center speculation was ramping up. Can the reason why this was ignored at the time be addressed? can be a learning point for the future?
Sorry, is that for Neil? That one?
I'm not really sure it's a comment, isn't it, more than an action? I guess, yes, it will be taken as a learning point, and we're now moving as rapidly as we can to deliver government's objectives. The networks will support as we can, and we've stood up a group that's a number of groups that are meeting as frequently as we can to support the process that's in place.
Thanks, Neil. The next one I have from Helen. Are there any ENA or government plans to consult developer stakeholders on the CAS or Connection Isolation Service implementation?
I'll take that. Not as far as I'm aware. No. So some of the proposed changes, we will engage stakeholders on the CAS, which is a government-led process, and I'll cover a couple of the other questions as well, if I may, at the same time, because to go back to afterwards your lots of reform questions. So the designation of strategic projects is being done by government. The criteria that are used to determine which projects networks will be asked to review is being developed by government, led by DESNZ and the Office for Investment and the Cabinet Office. So they have a set of criteria that they are using to assess these projects. So no, the CAS has been itself signposted in the industrial strategy and will go live in line with government's ambition, and network operators are there to support that process.
Thanks, Dave. We have a few others that we have been responded to. I have one from Dimitris. Perhaps for you, Laura. Will there be a specific form commonly used by DNOs that customers should fill out to declare which Gate 1 option selected for the schemes in compliance with the ENA guidance? This is a question from Dimitris, if you're looking at the chat, Laura.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Thank you. So it will kind of form part of BAU, I guess. So for option A, it would be requesting a variation. So you go to your local DNO and state that you would like a variation. For option B, you would go to the DNO and state that you want to go through the next window on your current Gate 1 kind of conditions. So yeah, it would just be with your local DNO. There isn't going to be a standard form as such. It's more just communicating with your DNO which option you'd like to go through.
Thanks, Laura. Next question from Gareth. It's a bit of a general one, I suppose. What are the current thoughts on changes required within the regulations by DESNZ and Ofgem?
I think that one might be a bit hard to answer in terms of if there's more specifics you can provide kind of in what context or which part of the updates, the activities you're thinking of. I think the main thing I would probably say is across all of these programs, it's a question that's discussed and considered regularly. I think with TMO4+, we are underway, so we recognize that timescales really don't tend to support more changes around those. But I know that the methodologies will continue to evolve over the lifetime of the framework, and that's a commitment and an expectation of the framework and the codes. And in demand, it's a question being asked quite actively as part of the thinking and the development of the scheme. But if there's anything more specific, then if you can help us, hopefully that helps. But if there's anything specific you were pointing at, then please help us with a follow-up question.
Next question is on the engagement from Steve. With recent changes to guidance such as G99 application raising entry requirements or queue managing, do you believe that you have carried out effective industry-wide consultation? Because I don't believe your consultation have been effective and reached every person impacted by the change.
So I'll take this one, and I think that but clearly it's it's a direction that's implying, it's a question that's implying an answer, right? So, I mean, the first thing to say is that networks definitely are keen to make sure that we engage with market customers and bring their inputs to the reform activities we're progressing. The queue management guidance, as an example, that was published here, went through a process of being, an open industry consultation, and the basis of the thinking that went into that was developed actually via the formal industry advisory groups and working groups that were industry representative populated. So we're very keen to continue that. I think we definitely have had some feedback before on some of those steps could have been signposted earlier, and then there could have been more engagement. So we're definitely reflecting on that. But the activity to engage with market and customers to bring inputs on these activities is definitely always important, and definitely something the networks recognize and will continue to do, and happy to take feedback on what will make it effective going forward.
Thanks, David. And perhaps another one for us. Will ENA publish how DNO's queues will be reordered as part of CMP 435? If so, when? So I can chip in first if you want, David. I think from our side, I think it'll be difficult to give individual DNO level granularity of where you're positioned in the queue. However, I think what we are looking to do is have a macro level view as an industry, and we are looking to ensure that there is the right reliable data that we can provide as an industry. But I think per customer and per individual positioning of the queue is something that we wouldn't be able to progress. Happy for you to add anything, David, if you want to add anything on that.
Yeah, I think so. It's a conversation. It's a question that's come up in other contexts as well. So there's what I can say is that all the sector, along with NESO, is very much looking at making sure we've got the right level of transparency about the overall queue. And part of the point of the TMO4+ framework is to put together a more comprehensive picture. So that exactly how that's published in terms of the level of granularity is a subject of conversation and focus, but it will be shared with the sector for a view of what the outcomes from the gate-to-door queue process is. I think if I'm inferring that some of the thrust of the question of how that impacts or how that sits with distribution customers, in scope customers will understand their position and their outcomes therein. That's definitely the case. Out of scope will be taken as separate, and that then be handled separately, so there won't be as directly a part of that publication. And there's an extent to which that should be the case. They're not changing, but exactly how the overall TMO4+ gate-to-all queue is published is something that's being discussed and prepared. Needs to be better able to answer that, but the transparency definitely is part of an understood part of the outcome of this first window.
Thanks, David. Next one's perhaps a comment for, I think, Enged and Spen, possibly in the Wales area. M2 in Wales does not align with the incoming Welsh planning changes, where getting a consent from application submission is more likely 14 months. This will be for anything more than 50 megawatts. So there wasn't any specific questions, but I suppose this is something that you would encounter on your day-to-day operations. Moving on, then I have next question from Grant. Sorry, is there a new stage where you are gate 1 but can ask for a full offer and the trigger milestone, and which ones?
So no, there's not a new stage. Sorry if it was confusing my answer to a previous question. So just going back to the two options. So if you go option A, then when you get your full offer back from the DNO, it would then include the M4 milestone, which would give you 24 months to be in a signed gate 2 position. So bear in mind that option A, you don't have to go through the next gated application window if you don't want to. You might want to wait till the following one. So it's just making sure that milestone is in there in line with the new ENA guidance, so that the project would have to be in a signed position within 24 months. If option B was chosen, then because you'd be getting your offer from the DNO at the same time or similar time to your NESO offer, then as soon as you're in that signed position for your gate 2, then M4 would be met. So M4 would still be in there, but it would realistically be met as soon as you've then signed that gate 2 offer. So hopefully that clears that up.
Thanks, Laura. So next one is a bit more nuanced. I understand that question from Mark, sorry. I understand that some BCA offers evidence submitted as part of the connection reform have been deemed as embedded demand by NISO and therefore are being removed from the gate 2 to whole queue process. Do you know how NISO are treating these cases versus against gate 2 offers to ensure we are not sent back to the queue or are disadvantaged in any way?
I don't mind starting this if anybody wants to come in. I'm not aware of any that have been deemed embedded demand. I mean, embedded demand is out of scope for TMO4+, so they shouldn't be going through this process anyway. I'm not aware of this happening, but like I say, it isn't part of the process, so they shouldn't have been providing evidence.
Thanks, Laura. And I think just Mark, if there's any even specific projects that are applicable, if you think there's value, please reach out to the specific DNO on this specific case. That will be useful to have a conversation as well. We next have a question from Andrew. I remain concerned about 6 months for M2 and M6, M2 to M6 and M5, unrealistic to progress that quickly while in JR period and often needing to revise planning or to wait for DNO tower detailed design plus engagement and instruction by busy ICPs. We will always regularly update the DNOs on progress and need assurance that they will be flexible beyond 60 days remedy with proof of continued development and further planning or advanced design. There's a follow-on question, but happy to pick that up first. Stefan?
So I've just put a brief answer in there. So in the milestone guidance, M5 and M6 can be delinked because this was discussed and raised, and it was one of the things we responded to when we were doing this back in June. So if there's a concern that the provision of the ICP and then the design of an ICP design for approval, which is the M5 milestone, that can be built into the M6 construction program, but the M6 construction program remained as previous, which is 6 months from planning. The construction program then defines everything else you need to do and can go into it. And I think, you know, the whole purpose of CAP, connections reform, all the work that's being done and milestones is to keep schemes moving towards their agreed connection date, and to have a construction program agreed with the DNO within 6 months of securing planning is not a big ask, because you can build in things like tower surveys, design into that program.
Thanks, Stefan. The next question from Morgan on allowable change guidelines. I think we've already covered that off, Laura and Dan. Thank you for that one. We have a question from Chris. What is the extent of pre-planning requirements? What exactly needs to be done 2 months post receipt of viable gate to offer? What does initiate planning permission mean?
Again, the detailed wording is in the guidance. I would need to refer back to that to give a solid answer, but effectively the 2 months, the M1 milestone is to have submitted, and there was clarity provided about the exact evidence for submitted. I think it was having submitted and received the offer, not the offer, the reference number. I can take that away and answer it in more detail, but that is clearly defined now in that guidance document. Pre-planning in the previous version was written as EIA, so environmental impact assessment, and a number of stakeholders said, well, it might not just be that, that's too specific. So we made it pre-planning is the requirements put on you by the particular local planning authority for that particular job. It defaults to 12 months, but if pre-planning was 3 birds, bats, bees surveys or whatever it might be, or some English heritage requirements that had a longer timeline, then that can be submitted and discussed and agreed with your DNO.
Thanks, Stefan. And Grant, your point on some of the wording issues is noted. If you could send it our way, we are collating some of them, noting that this is end of the day a guidelines document and not a binding code. So we are kind of trying to ensure that it is covering all the usual use cases, but not every nuance that's possible. So I just want to flag that as well. So you're happy to take that offline, as you mentioned, Stefan. So thank you so much for that. Is anything to add? Sorry, you look like you're just going to say something.
I was just going to say, in relation to the Welsh one, that's a case in point of what you were just saying. You know, a guidance document will very rarely cover 100% of the things, but obviously, if in Wales the process goes from being something that's normally done in 10 months to something that's normally done in 14 months, that will be taken into account in all milestone implementation. That is something that's out with the immediate control of the developer, and that's how I think it's defined in the guidance.
Thanks, Stefan. Next one I have from Morgan. Are you guys saying that Gate 1 offer once accepted only stays valid alive for 24 months and therefore has to be converted to Gate 2 before 24 months clock runs its course? Laura?
No, so a Gate 1, as Stefan said earlier, Gate 1 doesn't have any milestones. So a Gate 1 is essentially indefinite once you've received one, unless you change it back to a Gate 2 or you request to terminate it. The milestone comes into effect only at the point that if you decide to convert from a Gate 1 back to a Gate 2, and then as per option A, you request a full offer from the DNO before you go through the gated process. That's where the milestones will then kick back in, because you'll get a new offer from the DNO, which will include milestones that are updated in accordance with the new ENA guidance.
Thanks, Laura. Next question is from Minjiang. For option A, if NISO offers different point of connection from DNO offer, should DNO redo the network studies? How would that reflect in option A process? Also, should DNO charge another study fee for it?
So, yeah, the offer from the DNO is only subject to the outcome from NISO. So, dependent on what the outcome is from NISO, then it may mean that another study is required as part of that process.
Thanks. We have a suggestion for renaming your slide, Laura. That's cool. From Tony, referencing earlier question about projects in Wales. Is that something already answered, Laura? Sorry. Yeah, cool. We can move on. We have an anonymous user. Please, can you confirm the timelines which Gate 2 offers as part of Gate 2 HoldQ exercise have to accept once offered by each of the DNOs?
So I think there's still ongoing discussions in relation to that, I believe, unless anybody has anything they want to update.
So the agreement between the NISO and the DNO, the BCA, will have a standard 3-month period to sign off. So we're just finalising how that will apply when it then goes down from the DNOs to the individual customers on it.
I think that's one
that one period.
I think that's one that we'll take away and particularly make sure we take into the NISO hub and workstream conversations and come through hopefully to industry communications and guidance as we get into the offer stage through the TMO4+ program.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Stefan. So next one's from Deborah, whose views that the current queue management process is biased towards benefiting DNOs, not customers. So I just want to check by engagement is selective, and I guess it's a comment. What confidence can you give us that you're taking the planning process in the devolved nation into account?
I think that probably speaks to some extent to some of the answers Stefan's given, for example. And I definitely think it's worth kind of noting that there are places in that guidance where it is guidance, and that those conversations should absolutely be had with your DNO when agreeing those milestones and setting them out for your projects. It wouldn't be a good answer for customers or for the market if it was literally one fixed set of guidance as prescriptive for all situations, or that tried to describe that all projects were the same with the same schedule. So that kind of balance is something we're trying to reach with the guidance, and definitely speak through in detail with your DNO for your projects if there are specific planning timescales or steps or context for your project that should be considered.
Thanks, David. Next one is a very specific question from Rachel. Can you point me to a CUSC clause that commits NISO to open a gated window at least every 12 months? All the discussion suggested every 6 months, and I can't find anything in any commitment at all.
So I've just been trying to find it in the background. It's definitely there somewhere that it's a minimum of 12 months, but it's expected to be sooner, which I think is where the 6 months come from, because in conversations it's estimated that they may open it every 6 months. I'm trying to find this specific clause, but I'm struggling at the minute, but I will keep trying. And we can post it afterwards.
Yeah, we can. Yeah, if you do find it, do drop it back in the chat, Laura, or we can take it offline and perhaps point out. And that brings us perhaps to the last question I can see on Q&A. Can I check when saying that there are 2 options for DNO projects, subsequent gates? This only applies to projects that come out of the current gate 2 process. If you don't have any DNO offer at all, I don't see how you could go straight into new windows such as CMP 434 without the DNO accepted offer. This is a question from Stuart.
Yeah, as I understand the question, and I know Laura's, this is your area, so apologies, but the option A, option B is only for converting a gate 1 to a gate 2. And at the moment, the only organisation that can issue gate 1 is NISO, and therefore that's only schemes that have gone through either this gate 2 to Hall Q process or potentially in a future 434 window. If it's a new application, it has to go through the DNO, then TEA process to get the gate 2 or potentially the gate 1 status. But yeah, option A and option B is only for gate 1s, and gate 1s at the moment are only going to be the ones that have gone through the gate 2 to Hall Q process.
Okay, thanks, Stefan. I spoke too soon. I have a few more questions coming. Based on the various feedback here, can I suggest you reach out to SEUK, RUK, and similar working groups to consult clearly how new guidance and changes the guidance before making the changes? We can take that away and have a discussion in the working group to see how best we engage. I suppose that's not something we could sort out on this call, but certainly some reflection on the group. Thanks for that, Grant. We can take that away. Next, I have a question from Morgan. Does the gated window every 12 months deal? Does the gated window every 12 months deal mean that the next NISO window must open before end of August 2026?
So it would need to open before the 8th of July, because that's when it opened for the first time.
Thank you.
But just to come back in on that kind of thrust of conversation, I understand, of course, the interest and the relevance in this context. But ultimately, that will be a question in terms of the actual schedule and cadence and next updates that we'll need to take through the TMO4 Plus implementation groups and make sure that NISO and all of us are aligned and get a clear answer to the market. Not something we can really define here with this group, unfortunately.
And we have to remember that gate 2 to Hall Q is one CUSC mod and 434 is a different CUSC mod, and these are all things that will be unique to NISO's interpretation of their license requirements and their CUSC rules.
Thanks, Stefan. Please, can you confirm which NISO counter signature date is being used to determine embedded projects placed in the reordered queue? I've heard that NISO may be considering the latest mod app date rather than the date the projects were first included in the project progression. Question from James.
If we don't have an answer on the group, we might have to take that away, and it is a wider part of the queue formation activity, so probably best to direct that question at NISO as part of the TMO4 Plus discussions.
There were some specific cases addressed by NESO in terms of where it was a two-step offer, where it was a different. So there are some deviances, but yeah, it's a definite NESO question, David.
I think Grant is still unclear on the new gated process will create new gate ones at DNO. So I'm not sure. I think it's still unclear. He says anything to add, Laura, on that? We can probably take a couple of points with Grant offline, but
yeah, I'm not too sure which specific point that Grant is referring to, but yeah, essentially every time a project decides to go through a gated window, there is a chance it may get a gate 1 as an outcome. And if that is the case, then all of the elements on that first slide that I presented will come into effect, i.e. no queue position, indicative date, indicative location, etc. The options that I presented, like Stefan said, are only if a project is looking to go from gate 1 back to gate 2. So yeah, I'm not too sure which bit isn't clear, but hopefully that's cleared it up.
But just a key point to underline that has been a consideration for at distribution level as we've been going through these conversations is that is intending to create the exact same concept of stage of a gate 1 status as far as possible in a consistent way at transmission and distribution. And I think so it's the same concept, it's the same principle, and as aligned at T&D. The update we're going today is at distribution, given there is that one step of removal from transmission. This is how customers in that gate 1 can move back into the gated process and options therefore.
Sorry there, I've just read Grant's second part to the comment to try and flesh it out a bit. And the old process, for want of a better word, because it's not that old, you got your DNO offer, you then went through your transmission consent process, your transmission impact assessment process. They could not say no, in effect. They would have to grant consent, but it could be some time and some cost in the future. But you were always going to get a consented status in some point. TMO4+ has introduced the alignment of strategic, alignment of needed, and gate 1 is where you are not getting that transmission consent. So it's something that is new to TMO4+, and it is something that is defined by NESO. So you do not get a gate 1 or gate 2 status until you go through that TEA process. So your new application will be a standard DNO application. If it's relevant to TEA, you will go through the TEA process, and gate 1 or gate 2 will come out of that process. And I hope that makes it a little bit clearer from your added question.
Thanks, Stefan. We have one question from Tom. Absolutely makes sense that the new windows, that the new project should be gate 2 ready within 24 months, but with a bit of a nuance, what's the purpose of this time frame being fixed?
So in terms of if you go option A, and then you get the 24 months, the reason for that is to make sure that projects are progressing into gate 2. If they're not progressing into gate 2, then that's why that's when that milestone will kick in, because otherwise you would then, if you've gone option A, you've got a full distribution offer which is holding distribution capacity. We don't want that capacity to be held indefinitely. So that's where the 24 months kicks in, because if that project hasn't progressed through to gate 2 at that point, then that capacity can then be released for other projects.
Thank you, Laura. That is very well timed. It conveniently brings us towards the close of the webinar as well, and clears off all the Q&A questions. I'm sure that there are several other questions you would have, and given the limitations of the session, we only managed to cover through what were dropped here, and all the people who are attending here. I hope you found this session useful. This was a collective effort from all the members to essentially have this opportunity to talk to the stakeholders and make sure that some of the work we're doing is accessible and visible and transparent, like David mentioned. So we look forward to keep hearing from you, and I'm sure we'll have several of these conversations going forward. But on this occasion, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all the delegates who joined us on this call. We have, I think, At a given time, we had nearly 150 join this webinar. So I think it was useful. I hope it was useful. And we will reach out to you offline for the people who joined and not who've registered with the content of the slides and perhaps any other follow-on questions. We will look to reach out to you as well. And if you don't, please feel free to reach out to us as well, because I'm sure we will reach out based on the available email IDs, but quite often, sometimes there are errors which we can't reach out. So our intent is certainly to reach out and have these conversations, but please do use all the avenues you have to reach out to us. So with that, I shall say thank you very much for all the speakers who are on call, and my colleagues Natasha and Sophie who are in the background helping us set up this session as well. So this is a collective effort, as I think Connection Reform as a whole. So we're in this together, and hopefully we'll get across the line just as swiftly as well. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a lovely evening and week, and talk to you soon. With that, I'll wrap up the session. Bye.
Thanks, Abby.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.